Well, hello, Bill Barberg from InsightFormation. I'm so happy to be talking with you.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to our discussion.
You were introduced to me by our mutual friend and colleague, Tony Biglin. And as soon as I started to understand your work, I think you could call it intellectual love at first sight. I thought and you're so gifted at what in my vocabulary is evolving complex systems, cultural evolution of complex systems. And so I've gotten to know you pretty well, very interested in integrating our work together and so on. And now I get to introduce you in this podcast to my audience, which is very, very diverse. And if you could begin just by introducing yourself as a person and then how you became involved in consulting, not just businesses, which I
Right.
believe is the way you started out, but then whole communities in evolving their futures, as we might put it. So take it away.
Yeah.
Please introduce yourself to us.
All right. Well, gosh, it's 30 some years ago. I started this. I was doing consulting with blending management consulting with the rise of computers, with what became known as business intelligence, and started InsightFormation in 1991. And we were really initially focused on what became known as business intelligence, getting data from all of these different sources and turning it into analytics and dashboards and things like that. But around 2000, I was fortunate to attend a half-day presentation by the one of the co-founders of the Balance Scorecard, Robert Kaplan, and he was at that point, they were really sharing about the value of strategy mapping and organizations aligning around strategies when they were going through big changes. And I thought every client that we've worked with, this is really what they want, not just to look at the rear view mirror to see what's happened, but to know how they get forward to a new desired future state. And so I really dug into that whole methodology. And one thing I found again and again was that the consultants hated the software that was available to do strategy management. And it was all about slicing and dicing data or doing project management, which is very different from strategy work. So we began looking at what ideal technology to support strategy management would look like. And so we began doing, this was before webinars, we would do breakfast little mini sessions in the community. And we'd been actually Microsoft Business Intelligence Partner of the Year for the North Central District. So we had a good relationship with them. We were founding members of the Business Intelligence Partner Advisory Council for Microsoft.
Let
And
me stop you, Bill, just for a minute and just dwell a little bit more on business intelligence because
yeah,
what that was and what that distinguishes it from other forms of businesses
sure,
trying to operate.
sure. So in the late 1990s and in that era, the term business intelligence was coined, and it's really about things like data warehousing and data analytics. It's the ability to go into existing data, organize it in what we're often called data warehouses and data marts, and then use different tools to gain insights from that historical data. And we said
So,
that was
so
the,
it's more of a kind of a quantification, basically,
yeah,
more so than businesses will typically do.
right.
Is that part of it?
And it was helping to give them better insights to make better decisions. They were also called decision support systems, but they were
Okay.
very much about looking backwards and trying to understand the data. And
Yeah.
what we found is that our clients, even though we could give them great new data on what had happened and let them, analyze it in different ways and get insights, they weren't being very effective at using that data to really make improvements. And so when I learned about strategy mapping in this emerging field that came out of the balanced scorecard methodology, it was about how do you plan out and implement a future that has a lot of different interdependent changes, that it's not just something simple, but it's especially valuable in doing transformative change. As and an example would be United Parcel Service is when they shifted from just being delivering packages to outsourcing logistics. That wasn't just a little change in advertising. They had to do a lot of transformation across their entire organization to deliver that different value proposition.
Okay, so this is basically where whole system change comes in and how you have to
Right.
change multiple moving parts have to be
Yes.
changed together. Can you say just a little bit more about the technology of that? Because
Yeah.
how does that work in a business setting before we move on to how you expanded upon it?
Right. So, because it's not project management, it's not just analyzing past data, we found that consultants that were doing good work consistent with the best theory around strategy mapping, balanced scorecard, and strategy management, they were kind of kludging together things using documents and spreadsheets because otherwise they were fighting against a technology that was forcing them in a direction they didn't want to go. And we were very much one of the pioneering companies in strategy management systems. And when a report came out, I forget when it was, like 2005, they listed us as one of the leading uh, innovators in strategy management systems. And at that point, we were totally focused on corporations, um, and using it as an internal platform that was designed to manage the information for this large scale change that had a lot of different moving parts and a lot of things that you didn't necessarily know until you started down the journey. So, a lot of emergent elements, but we believed that it was a huge need for information management, that people would be overwhelmed trying to keep it all in their heads, and that we wanted to design a technology platform that would support the processes and the journey in the ways that the emerging best practices and what the leading consultants were trying to do. And so we got a lot of enthusiasm from some of the consultants that it would be great to have tools that would support this kind of information management around implementing multifaceted strategies.
And
So,
I know this is going to be we've already introduced the complexity part of this, Bill.
mhm,
And by inherently, whole system change is complex and has multiple moving parts. And you've hinted to an iterative aspect of this, that basically you have to just start doing it. And then there's going to be some sense, I know, in which you're going to be trying stuff out and then iterating and then and basically changing things in cycles. Is that correct?
well,
And there's the evolutionary part. I just wanted to be as explicit as possible about it at the beginning of our conversation.
yeah. Well, the other school of thought that we immediately ran into was the continuous quality improvement, or the continuous improvement work, which I had actually studied in Japan in the 1980s. I spent a year of college in Japan and visited Toyota and Sanyo and these different cutting edge companies that were doing Japanese business management, which was a lot of continuous quality improvement, plan, do, study, act sort of things. And we said, that's good, but that's good for improving established things and making them better. When you're dealing with transformation or something that's big, bold, and new, you can't just iterate your way through it. And an example, they talk about doing moonshots. Well, they didn't just keep trying things and improving until they finally got someone on the moon. What they had to do is say, we have this big, bold thing we're trying to do, and we need to use our best thinking to break it down into smaller components, and we need to get out of the gravitational pull of the Earth. We need to navigate into the moon's orbit. We need to get a lunar module landing on the moon. You Eventually we need to get back in through the Earth's atmosphere without burning up. Each of those became subsets of the strategy, and they were able to work in parallel on them and build out more questions. And as they dug in to learn more, they had more questions that needed to be answered. And then there were areas where they would do some experimentation, but it was in putting together a plan so they could get it right the first time. And
So first of all, it's paradigmatically new. It's not just incremental from what you're doing before. You're making that point. And then there's a lot of explicit design of the components. I heard you say that.
mhm,
And then, of course, there is going to be iteration. You're not going to get it exactly right the first time. And so that there's going to have to be, I mean, iteration is going to have to come in there
Hmm.
at some point, presumably. Is that right?
Yeah, but as much as you can, you want to be able to lay out the information that you can bring people together to say, do we believe if we do A, B, and C, we'll be successful? Or are there areas where we need to put more thought into, or are there weak links in the chain that we need to focus on? And it's that ability to do system thinking combined with technology that can manage that information so you're not just trying to kludge together different documents, and you can have different people collaborating and working on different subsets of it, but it's all part of a larger whole. That's one of the reasons we felt that it was going to be important to have strategy management systems in place.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And then if you say this is a long journey of multiple years where you're going to have adjustments and different changes as you go, it's that much more information that if it's not managed in an optimal way, it's likely to just going to collapse under the fact that people can't keep all the information in their head or in some homegrown set of documents and spreadsheets.
Yeah,
So
so
we felt there was a real,
there's a huge structural part of this that has to exist.
yeah. So we started down the path as a small, entrepreneurial company to create a new platform in essentially a new segment of technology. And we were trying to go after large corporate accounts. And that was difficult to do when we didn't have a lot of depth of capital. And we were competing against, companies like Oracle that were coming in and going after some of these. And so a couple times we came in second place. We were getting frustrated with that. But also on the consulting side, I was seeing more and more that it was different corporations really trying to maximize profits without much consideration of the harm that was happening to the greater communities or society or individuals. And the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back was when another consultant invited me to work on a project with a casino company. And so I facilitated with him a weekend workshop, and we were helping them work through the details of the strategies. And when I left, as I was flying home, I was like, I don't want to help them be successful because they seem to want to be exploiting vulnerable seniors with no consideration of how their lives are damaged if their most of their money ends up in the bank account of the casinos rather than in their own. And that put me in a bit of a crisis as we started looking at the companies that seemed to be making the most money and spending the most money on consultants. I felt were doing damage in the bigger world around them. And so we started to say, where can we use our skills? Where might we use our technology to make money, but also to have a positive social impact? And we started with hospitals and with local governments. Those were the two that we thought we could help. And around that time, the idea of community health improvement plans that the hospitals and the health departments should be working together. We said that's our niche. We can help with addiction and chronic disease and mental health and all of these complex issues that are not solved by an individual program. They're not solved even by an individual policy. It takes a whole set of things over time with many different collaborators doing different things to bring about a long-term change in what is now called social drivers of health, or um, the community ecosystems and cultural changes and things like that.
Now,
So
let me
yeah,
note, Bill, that when you made that transition, in part that was a transition from working with a single organization to working with multiple organizations, and that's a single organization presumably has more control over its operations than a community of organizations. And so I just wanted to note that transition as something
yes,
that you had to deal with. Do you have any comment about that?
yeah. The two things we felt our key targets would be public health departments and community coalitions that were tackling, suicide prevention or something. What we underestimated is that public health departments, every dollar they get is already allocated, and everyone's already 110% busy. So it's difficult for them to pick up new techniques, new technologies, and it's difficult for coalitions to make decisions because they don't have the formal structure of a large, corporation. So that has proved to be challenging, but we've persevered in a lot of different scenarios and demonstrated more and more how these approaches and tools can lead to significant and lasting changes that don't necessarily cost huge amounts of money, but they do take new ways of thinking and ways of managing information and of working together. So I won't say it's been an easy road, but we've persevered and demonstrated how valuable these things can be.
Well, maybe the best way to proceed is with cases. And so, do you think that that's true? That I mean,
Sure.
if there's anything more you'd like to say in general, but maybe we could just show how this has actually worked in some of your successful cases.
Sure. So the first client was original that we started to take on a social mission rather than just helping companies be more profitable was a property management firm in Detroit, in greater Detroit, that worked with a lot of uh, uh, affordable housing projects that they'd built, public housing, managing housing for low income people, and some mixed use developments. And as I was talking with their CEO, he talked about there was a lot of money that went into trying to help poor and disadvantaged people, but yet in many cases their lives were slowly sinking down towards even, worse quality of life. And as we'd been talking about strategy for his organization, and I shared that we were really trying to move into strategy for communities to come together and address these issues in aligned around a strategy rather than being so fragmented. So he said that would be an amazing way to uh, impact his whole industry of affordable housing and housing development and property management, where they could ideally make more money, have less of the wasteful spending of turnover and everything, and feel great that they were helping people's lives get better and help them on upward mobility. So we launched an effort that ended up a couple years later starting a nonprofit that would work alongside his property management and property development firms called Communities of Hope. And the goal was that nonprofit entity, which initially had no staff, no budget, never got a grant, but different organizations, primarily the Bob's organization, would have their staff allocate some of their time to this nonprofit work to understand how they could build a strategy to engage different kinds of organizations and the residents themselves in building communities of hope. And we
Actually, Bill, let me, I don't want to go through this too fast.
yeah,
So this nonprofit, Communities of Hope, is this something that existed previously
it did
or
not
that,
exist. I helped them found it.
okay, so they founded a nonprofit. The nonprofit, you said, had no staff. Is that right?
It didn't
But
have any paid staff for the first probably 5 years, but it had Bob was willing to allocate some of his paid people for his property management firm to spend some time with it, and
okay.
and it helped provide guidance. And we thought we were going to be getting grants, but we never ended up getting grants. But we found ways to create more and more value by engaging people, engaging nonprofits, engaging faith communities to work with the residents to
So there
create.
were multiple forms of capital, basically,
Yeah,
so you were kind of short on financial capital, but long on other forms of capital.
exactly. And
Yeah.
then eventually we found ways that it could generate income consistent with still being a nonprofit. And then it became essentially self-funded. And at some point, there would be large apartment complexes that would be financially underwater. And but if the banks were to restructure their loan with them and give them a huge reduction, the owners would have to pay taxes on that. So in some cases, they donated those properties or sold them for $1 to this nonprofit organization who could then renegotiate the the arrangement with the bank, get a big reduction, and because they were a nonprofit, they didn't have to pay taxes on that. So they did take advantage of their nonprofit status to build
Hmm.
assets. And it's been going on for over 15 years now. And a lot of the things we helped put together was just about coordinating the ways different organizations could better work with the residents with cooking classes or things that they were offering. We'd say, come and do them with our residents. We'll help coordinate the efforts. And a lot of it was working with the residents to say, how can you work together to create a better community? So there were social dance groups that they established, walking clubs, gardening, building a sense of neighborhood and community. And
Was Robert Putnam ever in your mind, Mr. Bowling Alone?
absolutely. He was a big inspiration for it. In fact, early as I was working on that, I read Robert Putnam's book, Better Together. And that's where I learned about the Tupelo miracle, which was an amazing historical example of a very depressed and economically struggling region in northern Mississippi really building from their own strengths, a robust economy and higher quality of life. And we shared that story many times that was the kind of thing we wanted to do. And yeah, Robert Putnam was a big influence in this work.
Did Eleanor Ostrom ever get onto your radar screen?
The name, but I've not until you introduced me. I didn't actually look up some of her details and some of her work, but it's consistent with the kind of
Of
thing
course.
of that instead of every individual organization trying to do something by itself, we needed to create a framework to say these are the things we're trying to change, and here's how different people, groups, organizations can be engaged in bringing about that change. And
Yeah,
yeah.
I wanted to really focus on that as something that can be generalized and to bring in, we're echoing previous conversations between just the two of us. Roseanne Haggerty and her book, her organization, Community Solutions, which is dedicated to the homelessness
Hmm.
problem, and her organization is a recipient of a MacArthur Foundation
Right.
$1 million grant. But the general statement is, for any systemic problem, you have to work at the systemic level. You have to get all of the stakeholders together to focus on to do something in a coordinated fashion. So there's a systemic dimension to this. But then what you have to do is you have to concentrate that on each individual case. In her case, each individual homeless person. In your case, it might be a different specific objective. So there's a combination of a general systemic level and the particular context that you have to
Hmm.
toggle back and forth between. And it strikes me that that's very general about the evolution of complex systems, that what you're doing is very similar to what she's doing. And it's very similar to what anybody has to do in order to uh, evolve a complex system. Did that sound about right to you? Is there anything you'd like to?
Yeah, I will add in that sometimes people make the assumption that to be successful, you really have to get all of these stakeholders at the even at the strategic level, really coordinated and working together. And the reality is you can make a lot of improvement just with some general what John Bryson calls co-alignment
Okay.
because organizations can resist the time and effort it takes to have a real detailed
Yeah.
coordination. And
Yeah.
even though I like what um, Skoll Foundation and others are sharing about system orchestration, I
Hmm.
don't like the metaphor of a conductor up there who's making sure everyone does everything the way the conductor
Sure.
wants it to be done,
Sure.
because the approach we take is you find some commonly agreed upon outcomes, and then you start taking the best thinking of different people who might be more conservative leaning, different viewpoints, but you begin to build out a framework that they may not agree with every part of it, but it starts to be a framework that's bigger than what individual organizations do. And then you start saying, how can we strengthen the existing efforts that are already moving some of these pieces forward? And not everyone has to agree on everything. Not everyone needs to be tightly coordinated, but they can begin to align. And that's at the
Well, that's much
strategic
more
level.
realistic. So I think I'm really valuable for us to have had this piece of the conversation because what you're doing is much more incremental. Basically, it gets from here to there rather than just trying to get directly to there. So thank you for that
Yeah, that's
clarification.
I think was a big. At first, I think we were trying to manage a collaborative strategy like it was a corporate strategy, and the boss could decide who's got to do what. But when you realize pretty much everyone's volunteering, you can't ask too much for them. from them. And we really try to find where are the not only mutually reinforcing activities, which is a term used a lot in collective impact, but where are the mutually beneficial opportunities? And I use the example of parents of teenagers carpooling. It takes a bit of coordination to set up carpooling if you've got a couple of teenage kids and as your friends and neighbors do. But once it's set up, you might only have to drive kids twice a week instead of 5 days a week. And that makes life easier for everyone. So you don't need a grant to do that. You don't need someone to really hold your feet to the fire because everyone working in a carpool benefits. And so they tend to sustain themselves. And if we look at ways that you've got a lot of fragmented efforts in a community and you start to step out of their individual silos and their organization focus and say what would really help us achieve the bigger changes and sustain those changes, and you co-create that framework, you can then begin working on different parts of that in much easier manners. And then it largely becomes how do you manage all that information? And that's where we feel the technology is so important to make it easier to do that, often uh, complicated work of alignment.
So let's go into the technology more then, if this is a necessary part of it.
Yeah, so our our platform is called Insight Vision. It's an online system. We completely rebuilt it after the first iteration that was designed for corporations to make it a cloud-based, shared platform for both building out the details of a strategy, building around strategy mapping as the core part of it, where you can zoom in like you zoom in on a Google map or a geographic map. But in this case, you're zooming in on part of the strategy and you pull the right people together and you start asking questions like what's the current state, what's the desired state for this little piece. Well, for each of those pieces, you want to have a place in the software where you can put that and easily view it. And then as that information is being built out through different conversations with different groups, you're getting this rich set of information that's your map of where you're trying to go and information about that. And then you can be adding the appropriate kinds of measures, the appropriate action plans. And whether you're looking at it via a strategy map, via a scorecard, whether it's embedded in some company's website, any place you click on it, you're tapping into that shared kind of set of information that is up on the cloud and specifically organized with all of the security and preferences and things that different users might have.
So this requires someone, I mean, a community has to be led through this by an expert, and then that's basically what you do as an organization, presumably. That's what you get paid to do, basically, is to walk communities through this process. Is that right?
Yeah, so we've had some very good success stories where the clients never got our software, so it's not absolutely essential. Our consulting can still be very valuable in
Yeah,
building out the strategy map and in helping people shift their thinking from organization focused to a system thinking strategy.
yeah,
We've had some that have had very limited budgets, and it's like, with your very limited budget, we can get you further with just consulting than with the software. But over
yeah,
a long-term journey, the software is very helpful. But I encourage people not to think of that we're bringing in software to solve the problem. You're bringing in software to manage information over a journey that we help teach people how to do. And
right.
sometimes we're doing facilitation over multiple years. Sometimes we spend, a few months giving them a good foundation and they can make good progress on their own. Depends on the
So is it the
situation.
case that basically that some of these projects become independent, and then they continue to function well and even improve um, after your formal relationship is over?
Yeah, so like the one in Detroit, we were pretty involved for the first 4 or 5 years, helping them doing a lot of new stuff, and we were learning a bit because it's the first time we tried to tackle a coalition strategy. So there was a learning curve for us as well. But then for several years, we would touch base with them maybe every other year, but we weren't doing any consulting. And then they just contacted us recently, and the state has approved them to provide supportive services for other housing providers. They're taking over a bunch of responsibility for a promised neighborhood, and they say we need to hire some more people, and we need to re-engage you because now we're going through some big changes, and the strategy is going to need more work. We need to get deeper. So, but they weren't
Yeah.
dependent on us for several years between the initial engagement
Yeah, that's
and
great. No,
re-engagement.
and I often love it when you get a study and they do pre, post, and follow-up. So of course, if the study is successful, there's an improvement between pre and post. But what happens between post and follow-up? Does it stay the same? Does it relapse? Or perhaps it gets still better? And if it gets still better, what that signifies is that actually what you've succeeded is implanting something which is sufficiently autonomous at that point that it's been internalized and it continues to improve on its own without any subsequent intervention. So that post follow-up period, I think, is what you hope for, and that's the true success is if you get a further improvement between post and follow-up. So all good. Well, let's have some other examples, and I think one of the things I've learned from you is that you managed to work in red states in addition to blue states. That there's nothing partisan about this, and so and I know that you're working in Arkansas, a project in Arkansas, and currently a team
Yeah,
has just yesterday met that's sampling our method. So talk about that project, and
sure.
then I think you have some projects in Canada which are
Yeah. That's in Alberta, which they call what refer to as the Texas of Canada. So it's a conservative region up there as well. So in Arkansas, I was brought in at the very early stages of an initiative called Restore Hope. Their governor, a Republican governor, had hosted an event to say we need to do better as a community to come together when people are dealing with the high rates of incarceration and recidivism, where people are not getting on a good path. They're returning to crime, and it's expensive for the state. And with youth in foster care, child welfare and foster care, one of the highest rates in the nation, and the kids were not doing well who were in the foster care system. So they didn't know what the solution was, but they knew they had a problem. So they convened a summit. And right after that summit, they engaged with me. And as soon as they got some initial money, I was hired, brought in right from the beginning to help them map out a strategy for these complex issues that they didn't know what the answers were. And you had a wide range of people from different backgrounds, but many, in a conservative state like Arkansas, on the conservative side of the political spectrum. So they weren't looking for a government program and spending lots of taxpayer dollars to just, in their mind, throw money at the issue. But when we started to say, what is it that we want? And they agreed that it would be better off if families could be stronger, so fewer kids would go into foster care. And if they were in prison, if they were released, that process could be such that they would never go back to prison again. Not because they were treated so brutally, but because they were helped to get on a better path, and that it would be more trauma informed, and it would understand that brain development and whatnot impacts kids whether they're in foster care system or juvenile detention or other things. We need to be focused on healing and helping, but in a way that they wanted to focus on really strengthening families. So I facilitated, me and another consultant went down for multiple trips, and we facilitated these sessions of building out strategy maps, and where there was a consensus of here's more than they knew that they could take on, but it was laying out a map of the many things that they felt would get them to a desired future state. And it surfaced many of the obstacles that previously some of them felt they had no control over, such as the system in Arkansas tends to punish people by taking away their driver's license. But if you take away someone's driver's license and then give them a fine and expect them to be a good provider for their family, they either have to drive illegally or do illegal things to get money. because it's hard to keep a job without, because they have very little public transportation. So part of the solution, not the entire strategy, but one of the many pieces involved, let's give people a path forward, whereas part of this, we'll make sure they get their driver's license back. And we need to help work with their, counseling. Do they need substance abuse help? Do they need job training, help getting a job, housing help? But it was all about helping them to become self-sufficient. And you talked about the two layers, kind of the bigger strategic level things, and then the more individual centered success plans or strategies. Uh, One of the things that came out of the strategy mapping was that they needed a technology that would help many different types of organizations that were serving people who had many complex needs. There needed to be a platform to better share information in a way that was compliant with HIPAA and FERPA and all the other privacy type requirements, but was really helpful for people who might be working with housing or mental health or some piece of this complex set of needs. And so they basically ended up getting a system that the university had started to develop, but they realized the university couldn't take it forward to sort of commercialize it. And it was donated to Restore Hope, which as a nonprofit organization was able to get funding to build out a platform that they call Hope Hub. So now when we go to communities, we recommend this pair of software tools. Insight Vision, which is our tool, which is ideal for managing the big strategy, but has no information about individuals and no privacy related information about their situations and their individual care plans and such. And the second one is Hope Hub, which is what Restore Hope developed. And that is a wonderful collaborative case management system that does a great job making life easier for the people on the front lines, and as an added benefit, collects great data over a longitudinal and time frame to be able to support research and evaluation and such. And an example in Sebastian County, where Fort Smith is, um, when in 2017 they had over 800 kids in that one county in the foster care system. And over the next 5 years, as they embraced the strategies, they embraced using the Hope Hub and the collaborative case management, they learned to get ahead of families before things were so bad that child welfare would take the kids away. And they learned to provide alternatives. So if it's, say, a teacher sees a student who's coming to school every day in the same clothes and probably hasn't taken a shower, they might recognize that that kid may be in crisis. Not that they need to be taken from their parent, but that there's a need for help. And they could refer people to this coalition, this alliance that had been established. And after 5 years, the number of kids in foster care was down to 375, and or was down below 400. It's at last I checked, it was the 375. It's now been about almost 7 years since, yeah, about 2018 to 2025, gone from about 800 to 375. And crime rates went down, incarcerations went down because there was a more proactive approach to help people that were
How much are
experiencing.
you tracking these? Are you really trying to get a dashboard of metrics to track this? Is that that's a whole
So
piece of monitoring progress?
So our Insight Vision platform tracks a certain type of measures around the strategy and some of the high outcomes, but we don't have all the detailed data. The beauty of Hope Hub is it has lots of detailed data because as part of their process, every month they're rechecking in with the families that they're helping, and they gather a whole slate of data so they can see, is their housing going from you know, at risk of becoming homeless to stable to, flourishing, where they've paid their rent on time for at least 6 months and things like that.
Well, there's a whole monitoring at both levels. There's a monitoring component, and I think what you're
Absolutely.
saying is that monitoring is a super important, and of course, the only reason to monitor is to do something in response to the information. So presumably, you're tracking these numbers at either level,
Yes.
and then if they're not improving, then that alters what you do, right? So there's an iterative process is taking place there around that's closely gathered
Yeah,
around monitoring.
yeah, and most of the frontline organizations had a really negative attitude towards software because in the past it had mainly been about putting in data to monitor how things were going, but it did nothing to help them better serve people and better coordinate their efforts going forward. Hope
Right.
Hub is different is that it's really designed to help you on the journey forward, working with individuals and their families. And then the data is collected just sort of as a added benefit. And
Okay,
similar
that's
with
important.
insight formation and insight vision, it's not just about how did we do for evaluation, it's about managing the information and the processes for making significant improvements. So in both cases, those are the software, I think, provides some very important new capabilities that the users appreciate rather than it's like, oh no, another place I have to put data so someone can generate a report to hold me accountable.
So I want to dwell more on working in conservative versus, let's say, progressive communities, and just because it seems they are somewhat different value systems. And what
Mhm.
I'm learning is that as you work with them, then there's ample flexibility within each value system in order to make progress. In one case, like if the family is a big value, that's a typical conservative value, we don't want government to do things. We want things to be done by family. We want to build character and that sort of thing. That provides ample scope for working. And then if it was more of a progressive community, there's a different value system, but that also provides ample scope. But what are the differences? If you could just and maybe I'm not even looking at it the right way, but to say more about uh, both the differences and the similarities of working in Detroit versus Arkansas, maybe those two, or
Yeah, I think people that are more conservative can appreciate that we're not just trying to throw more money at a system that they feel isn't working and maybe enabling people to, not be on a better path. We tend to look
right.
at we're improving efficiency, not just by slashing the budget and hoping people get sufficient, but by looking at where's their wasteful fragmentation and how can we better work together and use the existing resources to help more people and help them become more self-sufficient. And that, when we're laying out the benefits, we often at the top level of our strategy map, we talk about reducing waste and making communities safer and things that are some of the talking points on the right. And then we show how these strategies that we facilitate with groups that often are, have different viewpoints are helping to accomplish those things. And we tend to not go just to what's the more progressive solution or what's the more conservative solution, but we walk through what are the kind of changes we want to see in the kind of community that we want. It's not, defund the police or uh, bring in, militarize the police. You start working through what are the key things that we think will lead to the kind of safer, flourishing communities that we want. And as you
Okay.
start addressing those things, you find there is a lot more common ground than if you take the most polarizing examples of strategies or approaches or programs. And because we don't start with those, we start building from the common ground. I think that really helps.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from that is you don't really have to conduct yourself differently in a liberal versus conservative community. You don't have to have plan A and plan B for these. There's something by starting with the commonalities, as you just said, then you could a single procedure
Yeah.
works for both. Is
And
that
and
is
I
that right?
think
That's very optimistic.
yeah, and I guess I'm careful not to use polarizing languages or concepts. I understand both sides pretty well. And so you could say that the child welfare system way disproportionately gets kids of color into the foster care than white kids. But instead of going in and saying, we're going to treat this as a racial equity issue and make it all about that, we just go in and say, we're really trying to improve this system to help families. And if we make some big improvements, you're you're reducing the injustice or the inequity because you're really reducing a lot of the most egregious examples of that, which harm the black and brown families much more. But we're not making it a primarily a racial equity issue because that gets people's defenses up or whatever. But as we look at how we're making a better community, we're often addressing issues that are disproportionately affecting black or
Yeah,
marginalized
yeah.
people,
I
could
just
be
had
indigenous
this.
or whatever. So we're trying to address them, but it's as part of making a more flourishing community for all. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is had a conversation with Peter Gray about education just yesterday in a podcast that I recorded, and one of the conclusions there was if you create a safe and secure school environment, a social climate in school, not only does it improve academic performance and mental health outcomes, but it helps to close the achievement gap because the ones that
exactly.
are lower in the system are benefiting even more than the ones that are upper in the system. So you really get I mean, it's a total win-win
Yeah, I mean,
situation.
we're working now on infant brain development, early relational health, and creating what we call neuro nurturing ecosystems. Much of the effort is going to be helping those that are currently falling furthest behind. And that if that is going to reduce the disparities, it's going to reduce the gaps. But we're happy that that's happening and we can talk about that, but we're just positioning it as this is what all children need, and we need to focus on the kids that are suffering the most because they're not getting that, and figure out how do we as a community help address that. And so that's just sort of maybe avoiding some of the polarizing language while we're
What's
still
the what's the
addressing the
receptivity what's the receptivity to science like? We always hear about anti-science and stuff like that, but it sounds to me like when you get people in a receptive frame of mind and you start talking about, neuroplasticity in very young children and so on and so forth, they might be all ears. So what's the
yeah.
receptivity to the whole value of science for this?
I'm not going to say we haven't had problems, and a lot of times, sometimes it comes with funding, and it's getting more challenging, year by year, to get people to think outside of some narratives that they've been taught. Um, but I think the overall approach of saying that we bring and the importance of uh, more of a system thinking approach. Um, we're trying to bring people along together, not hammer them with something and try to make them admit that they're wrong and you know really missing the mark on different things. We try to find the common ground to bring people together, and
Hmm.
there's a fair amount of it out there on most issues.
Yeah. So, what about what's going on in Canada?
Yeah, so in 2019, we were doing a webinar on addressing the opioid, heroin, and fentanyl crisis, but showing the strategy maps and all the different complex issues. And Diana Lowe, who had been for the prior 6 years working on an initiative called Reimagining the Family Justice System. Especially a lot of their work was looking around divorce and family restructuring and child custody, how that was a very adversarial process where they were trying to help people by getting them lawyers. The lawyers were trying to win. So it became a process of doing, frankly, harm to the families and not setting them up for being the healthiest going forward and causing a lot of toxic stress and trauma in the children that were involved. And they'd been studying a lot about system change and collective impact, but they still didn't see the practicals of how to do it and what tools they needed. And when Diana saw the webinar that we were doing, she said she was in her home office just outside of Calgary, waving her arms and saying, "This is what we need." And so she's texting me during the webinar saying, "Will you work with us in Canada?" And when I announced that one of our key focus areas for a program we were launching, kind of a group learning program, was going to be on adverse childhood and ACEs, she was like, that fits in with us. Can we be a part of that? So they joined our first kind of group coaching program starting in January of 2020, which was also the beginning of the pandemic. But it was online, so that didn't hurt us too bad. We had several of the groups drop out, but the 3 groups that stuck with us for the 6-month program all got a lot of help in thinking through strategy mapping, system thinking, embracing these types of things. So they were able to scrape together a little bit of money and engage us to then take them to the next step after that 6-month learning and doing program started or ended. And so we worked, they also got a group from British Columbia that was working on a similar issue. So we teamed them together and we worked on building out the details of the strategy map and helping them think through how do we move forward on all of these ideas that we're passionate about. And we know there's a lot of need for changes, but it's a very entrenched system. Getting the courts to change means you have to have a whole bunch of other things in place, getting the communities to come together. And so we learned from them because they had been doing a lot of work on system transformation. And they introduced us to what's called the Giels framework. And we then blended that into our approach of strategy mapping. And as we worked with more and more people, we could lay out here's how, over the next decade, we think we can bring about a transformation of this system. We're not just trying to incrementally make it better. We don't want just a trauma informed system. We want something that's dramatically different in terms of how we get ahead of these issues, how we help with community coordination and different way and change the court processes so you're not just battling it out in court, but before you even can come to court, you have to go through some other types of supports and work through the parenting issues or the finance issues or the substance use issues, because that's where you probably need help. And then if you are going to go through a family restructuring, um, let's do it with counselors who are helping you do that in the best way, and only bring in the lawyers to make sure the legal I's are dotted and T's are crossed for any legal agreement. But it's not to have lawyers battle it out. It's a single lawyer who's working with the counselors to help them accomplish that. So it began building out more details, getting more people involved, getting people from the courts, a lot of education, because we worked on um, paradigm shifts and mental model shifts as part of the strategy, teaching people who were in lawyers and law students and judges about brain science and trauma. At the same time, there had to be pilots because we were trying to do something that had never been done. So there had to be pilots of how can we help families with these issues? How can we um, have new ways of engaging families earlier before they're in front of a judge and so on. But the strategy map and the Insight Vision software helped us keep track of those different pieces over a few years as we were working on them, and it allowed us to get buy-in from the Supreme Court of Alberta to give one of the judges a 9-month leave to work on this, and to work that he wouldn't have had the time to do had he had his normal court caseload. And we were able to tap into some other funding. We were able to work with a national organization on family law and have it be a featured topic at their annual conference. There was a whole bunch of little things that came together as we
Or not so
piloted.
little. I've been trying to do the same sort of thing enough to know how hard it is. And so, I mean, just that you managed to find that much flexibility in this complex system is amazing to me. So that's one reason why I called it intellectual love at first sight.
Yeah.
That is no mean feat to take a cultural system with that many components and actually find the flexibility to move it forward. So that's a real accomplishment.
Yeah, and if you go into the family courts in Grand Prairie where we've piloted, or we don't like to use the term pilot, it's our demonstration project. um, People walk in and it's like, am I even in the right place? Because it used to be, long lines of angry people and frustrated families and stressed out kids. And they said now it's like very few people there. And different people have commented it's like they've never seen how it's so different than it used to be. Um, but that happened quickly because we had a few years of putting the right pieces together so that it could make a big change. You can't just go try to make the big, push the big change through without getting all the other elements um, sufficiently far enough along. And so it took not a lot of money, but it took a systematic working on many parts of a larger strategy that was very carefully thought out. And now there's a lot of places that are saying we need to do that, including deploying of Hope Hub, which is one of the things we introduced as from our work in Arkansas. We introduced that up in Canada, although the changes that we've achieved were accomplished before that has actually been.
So you're
Uh,
actually replicating something that that originated in Arkansas elsewhere. So
yeah, and that's one of the strengths we bring is because we're working on these complex issues in a wide variety of scenarios, from urban areas to rural to Arkansas to Canada to New Hampshire and other places in California. We can bring things that we've done. Sometimes it's things we put together a grant application for and we didn't get the grant, but we put together a bunch of elements of a
yeah,
strategy.
right.
Another
That's the
community might
value
say
of writing a proposal is even if you
we
don't get
can
it, you have a
we can
plan.
borrow that. We let's put that in our proposal.
You mentioned urban and rural, and I mean, so many people comment on this big divide between urban and rural. Um, I'm guessing that you're saying not so much, just like liberal and conservative, but do you have anything to say about the urban-rural divide?
Well, one of the things that I like about the rural is that you have a lot of communities that have very similar challenges. And so we believe as you build out success stories, you can replicate them. So, for example, as a low cost way of helping teens in small communities, we're actually working in a city of about 5,000 people in Wyoming, where the teens complain there's nothing to do. And we're working with the public library and with the health department and other groups to really establish a board gaming community using modern board games, which are way more fun than the games of 20, 30, 40 years ago. And we're having one of the manufacturers or the creators of a really a game that's spreading all over the world, donating hundreds of dollars of the worth of the game to help start this board game community. And we're looking at how you can weave together different elements. What role could the restaurants play, or the faith communities, or the public library to address this issue? And then how do we weave in other elements like mental health first aid or other things so that when we look at wanting to have thriving teens and multi-generational relationships, we start saying, what would we want as a community? And in a small community, you have very different set of challenges
More
than perhaps in
flexibility,
a
yeah,
large
but
community.
yeah, of
You can
course, the
still
whole
use
thing
the
is
same
still.
thought process.
Yeah, and then of course cities exist as neighborhoods,
Right.
in many ways it's just a compressed, spatially compressed rural rural um,
Yeah, they're
community.
neighborhoods. They just don't have a bunch of other neighborhoods around them.
So what's the role of the business sector in this? So you're dealing in some ecosystemic level, and so there's many organizations involved, including business organizations, but not restricted.
Right.
And then is there some sense in which the business community, or you focus on the local economy,
Yeah.
it's kind of like back to businesses in terms of making them strong and also integrated with the community. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So three quick things there. One is coming up on September 9th, I'm doing a workshop up in Calgary for a whole bunch of their corporations, their corporate social responsibility staff. because many times there's somebody who's, hired, by a large company to do corporate social responsibility, but they're trying to figure out what should we do? What can we get our employees to do? Or what can we do to help be good citizens and make our community stronger? But they're thinking in isolation. And we're helping we should have over 50 corporations or 50 organizations represented and saying, let them be part of working with the United Way and the nonprofits and the city government to build out a framework around the many different issues that the community is facing. And once you have that strategy map framework, and hopefully with our software, being able to say, where is an area that, we're the utility company. What might be a way we could help support something on this strategy map where they're not
Exactly.
trying to be the whole solution, but they're using their unique strengths to advance parts of a larger co-created strategy. So corporate social responsibility people, I think, are a huge opportunity to align for much greater impact because I think they're currently fragmented and not having the positive impact that they want to. Second is when you come to teens and youth, having a city where those kids are not dropping out of high school, not getting into crime, they're graduating from high school, they're doing well. Businesses have a big interest in that for their long-term success. And so we're looking at different ways. We don't have the examples yet, but we're in places like Fort Smith, Arkansas, we're talking what are the roles they can play, such as offering their employees 1 hour a week to be a mentor. So 4 hours a month on paid time, they can be mentoring, and that can get more people to mentor some of these teens. And then another way is
Bill,
uh,
before you, let me stop you again because when we're talking about teens and your first example in Wyoming, where the teen said, "We don't have anything to do here," and now you're trying to do something about that, presumably that's participatory. In other words, the teens are telling you what they might like to do and so on and so forth. And I'm reminded of um, a school program that I did long ago now in Binghamton. But one of the innovations in this school for at-risk youth that we created was they said, we want to do what we want to do in school. And we said, okay, we'll create fun club. And then they got to make their own up
yeah.
action. And that was big. And so back to what you were just saying, that to do something about youth, 1 hour a week for mentors and so on. Are the youth participating in that? I mean, are they having a voice in what the community is trying to do for youth? Is that being done to or done with?
So it's um, in some cases we're introducing some things based on input and survey we've got from the youth. But in Fort Smith, one of the specific actions that we put together in Insight Vision to say the need is we want to make sure we're including youth voice. So an action would be to convene some groups of teens and get their input. And we put a start date and an end date. We want that done by the end of November, I think. And then we assigned it to a person who's going to then work with getting a diverse group of youth, and their output is going to be some of the ideas from the youth and the youth's feedback on some of the ideas that we've floated out there that might be scalable. So we often look whether it's the indigenous population or the youth or the people we're trying to help. If they're not being actively engaged, we create specific actions and measures to be able to track, are we engaging them? Because we absolutely believe that any people we're trying to help should be an active part of the solution,
Yeah,
not just a voice, but co-producers of the
yeah,
solution,
yeah,
not
and
just
that again
co-creators.
is convergent with Ostrom and her core design principles. It's inherently democratic and participatory.
Yeah,
That every member of the group has to be participating in the governance of the group, including the decision making and everything.
yeah,
Which isn't to say that there's no structure or hierarchy or leadership, and I think that's one of the optimistic things is that for this to work, it's inherently democratic and and participatory, done with, not done
yes.
to. I've got two more major points I want to
Okay.
cover, but first continue. What were
Yeah,
you
for
about
for
to
the
say?
corporations, one of the organizations we're collaborating with is called CHC, Creating Healthier Communities, and they do workplace giving campaigns. And they have them in quite a few states with the state government. They have the large federal employee workplace giving campaign. But what we're looking at doing is in a community where we're working, whether it's large or small, to engage the employers in working through their program so that the employees of a company can easily donate to some of the specific issue not nonprofits
Yep.
in their community that are working as part of the strategy, but also how can they donate their time and effort to support the strategies.
Yep. Yep.
And a key strategy that which gets back to tying in the youth is how can we support positive youth entrepreneurship.
Yep.
So are there ways that we can help high school students start little businesses where some people are helping them get customers and some people are helping them with their accounting or with their business planning? And because if you can start them down a legitimate entrepreneurial path, that could bring all kinds of benefits versus them, doing stealing or other things that they might do
Yep.
either out of boredom or desperation.
Uh, um, yeah, absolutely. So, all great. Well, here are my two uh, final points, and then to which I invite you to add. One has to do with uh, scientific research, let us say, although there's more, that's not quite what I'm driving at. All this amazing stuff and that you're doing. And I want to say, and I often talk about an archipelago of knowledge and practice, many islands of thought and practice with little communication among islands. And so often you find that somebody, let us say Eleanor Ostrom, is a rock star within her island, within a certain sphere, and unknown beyond its borders. Unknown beyond its border. I often, when I'm speaking to an audience,
Yeah,
I ask them to say, think of a giant upon whose shoulders you're standing, someone really influential to you, and then name that person to your neighbor and see if they've ever heard of that person. And so when I think of your situation, I think you, first of all, you've done this incredible work. Who knows about it?
right.
Who knows about it? And I think, uh, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're situated in a tiny island, and
Yep.
and no one knows about it. Now, what could be done about that? One way of putting that is, has anything you've done resulted in a peer review publication? And I'm guessing that the answer is no, or maybe one or two. But first answer the
One
question.
that is yeah,
One.
one in actual peer review article or journal, the Journal of Change Management. It was
Good.
leading social transformations, and
Okay.
it was focusing on our work in Alberta with transforming the family
Okay.
justice system. Uh,
Okay.
and there've been other articles that have had a degree of peer review, but there's only one that I think would meet the mark of a peer review journal article.
And published
Yeah, published in the Journal of
in
Change Management. Yeah.
a disciplinary journal, relatively um, small discipline. So that's exactly what I would have thought. And so one question is, would there be value from your perspective, from a practical perspective, or the value in any sense of, like, say, upping one's game? That as this takes place, as this social change takes place, it actually is being studied as a process of the cultural evolution of complex systems in a way that would be published in a journal like Science or Nature or the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It's not
Right.
just a prestige thing. It's just that people from all different islands, contexts, are able to look at this and say, my God, this is like what everybody needs, is the ability to evolve complex systems. There's something very general about this. And so the question would be, first of all, is that a goal worth pursuing? For me, the answer is obviously yes. But secondly, then what more would be needed as you're doing this important work in the real world, studying it in a way that, providing evidence for it and so on, is that feasible?
Yeah. So two things that have started to happen because that is a huge need. Based on our work in Alberta, the Alberta Law Foundation gave a grant much, much larger than any grant they'd previously given, over $26 million in Canadian dollars, to establish the Center for Transformation at the University of Calgary. And that included 2 endowed faculty positions and an organization that will have a staff of 8 people in theory by the end of this year,
Okay.
including Diana Lowe, who's my client that I mentioned earlier, who said this is what we need back in 2019. So there, as an academic center for transformation, are hoping to help advance this field based significantly on the approach that we're bringing and how it's different from traditional evaluation, it's not project management, it's about large scale system change and transformation. And secondly, the International Research Society for Public Management, which is a large global academic group in that space, they early this year, I believe, or late last year, established a new interest group called strategizing because they recognized that there was just a need for research on this field and this approach. And so those are 2 areas where, in the academy, there's starting to be a recognition that this is an area that's starting to emerge, and it's very important for many of the complex issues that we need to solve. But it's still known to only a very small number of people, and but those that are uh, getting to really dig into it are seeing that this is something that needs much broader visibility, and
Yeah.
people
So
need
I
to
think,
learn this in many different fields if we want to have better success in addressing the complex challenges our world and communities are facing.
so my final question is, what are your own limiting factors for your organization? And how could those limiting factors be alleviated? And then I'll follow that up with, or what would happen if there was suddenly 10 times more interest in what you're doing than currently the case? Would you be able to accommodate a surge of interest?
Well, we in our own strategy map for the last several years, one of our objectives is to enhance scalable knowledge transfer. Because this is not just a simple, here's a half-day workshop and now just go do it. It's decades of learning
Yeah, well, it's a
these
continuous
tech-
process.
techniques and tools and refinements. So we've been building e-learning courses. We've been building out wiki, where we're building out templates where people don't have to go start from scratch. We have a very robust one around different aspects of adverse childhood experiences that goes from, you know, prenatal all the way up through adulthood, but where we're building out work that we do in one community or with one client so it can be shared with the next. So everyone doesn't have to go through the same process, but they still need to go through enough of the process to get the mindset shift and build the trust and the relationships, but at least they can have examples to look at. Um, we're also partnering with organizations, both the Center for Transformation that I just mentioned at the University of Calgary. We're really working to build their staff and integrate this into their School of Social Work, which is the largest, I believe, if it's not the largest, it's one of the largest in Canada, and their School of Law, which is a fairly large and innovative school of law, to have that be influential in raising up more people who understand these things, and partnering with other larger consulting firms that are in this space where we're trying and they're interested in adopting some of our techniques and tools, so we're less of a bottleneck, because frankly we are somewhat of a bottleneck now in that we can only walk with so many clients in any given year. Uh, but we've really been working to say, how can we scale that up and build the capacity? Because we think that as more people see how effective this can be, it's no longer, oh, we can't do this or we don't have enough money. It's like, no, even with limited money, even with all of the problems that are going to be more and more acute in the coming years, the ability to co-create and align around strategies is is, I think, the best path forward, where the resources we have can be used much more effectively and we can actually make really significant progress on these issues that we're seeming to lose ground year after year in most of them.
Yeah, another major question occurred to me, Bill, so I'm going to retain
Okay.
you for one more. When this is viewed through the lens of a generalized Darwinism, including what we call dual inheritance theory, there is a major distinction between inner and outer, basically, that basically on the inside we have meaning systems or worldviews or religions or theories or all this stuff on the inside, which organizes our experience and ultimately results in action. And if we really need to change the way we act on the outside, that requires changes on our meaning systems on the inside. Every meaning system results in a repertoire of behavior. So everyone's flexible to a degree based on their meaning system. But to go beyond that current repertoire of behavior, not only do we need to do things on the outside, we actually do need to do things on the inside. And so I just wonder if that resonates with you at all, and whether you actually recognize that, actively work on it, or maybe just observe it, that as you work with people and communities and so on, that it does result on some inner changes in what we can broadly call their meaning system, um,
Mhm.
in addition to everything that's being done externally.
Yeah, I one of the things that I've seen is that people often go into a field, whether it's public health or starting a nonprofit, because they really want to do good and make the world a better place and they're intrinsically motivated. But then survival of their entities and getting the funding that they need gradually, I say, crushes their soul and puts them into where they have to play the game. This is how I get the grants. This is what I need to do. And then oftentimes leaders come in who are good at that. And it becomes less and less about really solving the big social issues that they originally wanted to. And the organizations that thrive tend to be good at getting money, not necessarily good at solving the problem. And so I think that there can, when I find if people are really passionate about the issue, like Diana Lowe was with the reimagining the family justice system, or Paul Chapman with the work in Arkansas and Restore Hope, they were passionate about we need big changes. And it's been very rewarding and fulfilling for them. So that's a bit of an inside motivation that I see that can sometimes make it more difficult. Um, and I think that,
So uh,
right.
go ahead, Bill.
Oh,
Don't mean to be
I think
impolite. Go.
sometimes it's people realizing how they can be more successful as an organization, that things can go smoother and better and be less stressful if they're working as part of a larger team. And then the what it takes to be successful as a team becomes appreciated. But oftentimes they haven't seen what that looks like, and that's why we're excited to create success stories that they can learn from.
Yeah, so it's funny that it brings us back to Tony Biglin, who introduced us to each other. And one of Tony's main points is that corporations are selected by consequences. That when everything is a profit motivation, then we more or less know which direction a profit motivated corporation, such as a business, is likely to do: exploit elderly people for their own profit. So there's a meaning system and a value system, which is never going to be part of the solution. And then your own decision was you wanted to do good. So you had a pro-social motivation that caused you just to leave that and then to do something, do something else. But something you just said, I think, is quite interesting, that nonprofits don't escape that, because even though if they begin with a pro-social motivation, then there's still the realities of surviving as a nonprofit, which ends up with selecting basically for a mindset which is on behalf of the nonprofit, keeping it going,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the actually mission of the nonprofit. And so the nonprofit sector ends up being much more as much a part of the problem. And I've heard other people say that it's like the Hunger Games. All these nonprofits are
Yeah.
like competing for resources, and that's what they've been selected to do. And ultimately, rather than expecting people or organizations just to, heroically stand against that, like sailing against the wind, then or swimming upriver, then we need to configure things so that selection by consequences favor
Right.
these things, and then you're sailing with the wind, and then you're being rewarded for the right thing. So it does end up with, in the first place, creating selection pressures, cultural selection pressures that do favor the welfare of the whole system. And it's at that point that the mindset, which is the pro-social mindset, is I want to do good all the way up and down the scale is my mindset, my meaning
Yeah.
system. I'm pro-social, that in a Darwinian world, that actually gets selected.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, the way that I see it from where I stand. So what takes place on the inside, in a sense, is a product of what gets constructed on the outside.
Yeah.
So isn't that interesting?
Well, the Skoll Foundation and some others, New Profit is another one they collaborated with, spent a couple of years really looking into why the philanthropic sector has had such limited success in the issues they've been trying to, support and see improvement in. And in the winter 2025 issue of the Stanford Social Innovation Review, they published a supplement which is available to anyone. You don't have to have a subscription to the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and it's about a 16-page supplement with several different articles about how the philanthropic sector needs to change, evaluation needs to change. What are some of these forces that are hindering successful ecosystem approaches? And they emphasize the value of system orchestrators. And again, I don't love the metaphor, but I love what they're saying is that there's this messy, nonlinear work of breaking down silos and taking more system thinking approaches that has not been traditionally funded and supported by philanthropic organizations or government funders that want give me a simple thing, lay it out in detail, and I'm going to hold you accountable for doing every step you said. And it drives people to take positions that keeps them isolated and rather than working together, and it creates some of the dysfunction. And so funders in both philanthropic and government the way corporations can find beneficial ways to be supporting their community well-being. um, I think that there's a growing recognition that some of those things need to change, and that will create different forces where there will hopefully be more rewards for working together and getting population level results rather than that, like I said, the Hunger Games and the
Yeah,
dysfunctional competition.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm hoping
So
that that will get more traction and bring about more changes, and that the work we're doing can show some of the how and the techniques and the tools for doing that.
yeah, okay, awesome. All righty. Well, I think that's a great conversation for us to have had, and I think that any final words you have, Bill, or think
Oh,
we've
well,
covered the
thank you
bases?
for your work. I'm looking forward to learning from you as our relationship grows. And I hope that if people want to contact me and see how they can be a part of our work, we have a lot of stuff that we share just to get people introduced to these concepts. And we especially are looking for communities and coalitions that have that heart and that mind, and hopefully some resources to say we really want to see significant change and complex issues, and that they're like Diana. When they see our tools, they'll say this is what we need, and they can be part of the success stories that are studied for many years to come of people who are coming together and solving or making dramatically improved progress on the issues that have proven to be very difficult in the past decades.
Awesome. All righty. Let that be. Make it be. All righty. Thanks so much, Bill.
All right, take care
Bye bye.
and thank you.